Hello and welcome, and my plan this morning was to show Theta. So I'm going to do that now. But before I do such, I'll do the whole intro thing. The current date and time is shown on the screen. This will be the only time you will see this in this video, and it will not be shown in the thumbnail. Like the 4-minute, that's not the 4-minute morning, the crypto day morning was rather, and I meant at the end to show the image before I stopped the tape. And when I pushed the stop button, I'm like, oh, beep. I didn't get it. So when I thought the title, I just checked the time right after there, like 10 seconds later, and then it was 9:41. Now it's 9:55. But that's not really the point of this. I'm going to talk about this. And of course, everything's your own risk, own reward, yada, yada, yada. But I'm going to follow through on ideas. I talked about intros on 2, and I'm going to talk about 3rd and go in depth on it. The first one was sending WWE to serious competition. I commented about 5 million or less, and maybe it might be 7 or 8, as I have to talk about how some of the greats, like Phil Brooks and some others, would actually, how much they're going to want get paid. I'll talk more about that later on. Idea number 2 is send dub EA ? I don't know who's in the game. I haven't played much of the video games for a while, and I think 2016 or so I played a bunch of basketball, and really mainly the basketball and baseball games. It was fun, and I got bored of it. And I used to play it as a kid, and I loved Madden 95. Madden 2005, I think, or 2000, no, even earlier than, I liked 05, but the best Madden game for me was the PC version, Madden 04, I think. It was really, really fun. And I'm going to talk about video games for sports genres, and the major ones, like basketball, hockey, football, European football, I guess, American football, all that stuff, all of those big sports, but mainly the big 4 in North America. And this would be that of playing and changing, that of history. And maybe it's just a safe prediction to assume that as a timeline or evolution of things transpire, that when we look at video games into the 20s and 30s, that this will just have to come into play. But let's start back in time, even as far back with the MLB and NHL, as the NHL has just had its 100-year anniversary, and baseball is far, far back from its 100-year anniversary. The NFL has a little ways to go, as does the NBA, but they have very good histories as well. And in this situation, I'd like to be able to play a baseball game, start a franchise in 1897 or whatever the start in that time frame was, and have players throw like they did back then. Have the stadiums look like they did back then. Have the real players from that time frame. And that would be an experience in itself, just to play the games as they historically used to be played. In hockey, you'll be playing many of your games to start without the use of helmets. And then as you play games that would be in the 70s and 80s, some guys wear them, some guys don't. As the NHL into the 80s made a rule that players starting in the NHL from whatever period on had to wear helmets. And that's the whole point, is we can see how timelines from how 1910, 1930, 40, 50, 60, and 70, that would be really fun. And when you're playing games normally in a franchise mode, then you normally would go to draft and you get names that are random, which is cool and realistic in real life, because whenever I see drafts in real life, and the NHL draft was the most recent one, I'm looking at a bunch of names I never heard of. So that brings me back to my video game heyday time, like Madden 04, when I was playing the game and I'd start a franchise, and next thing you know, I would be playing with guys in season 7 and 8, and the whole league is practically of guys that I've never heard of, but it was fun. But it would be more fun to be able to have situations like, okay, it's the draft and we got somebody like Joe Montana in it for the NFL, Or Tom Brady, how about that? The 2000 NFL draft. I think he's not going to go around 198 or 199 or whichever number that he went. And Ryan Leaf will not go right behind Peyton Manning anymore in the draft a few years before that. So it'd be very interesting to see these names and players that as fans we once loved, and we can now see how different it is if Wayne Gretzky never plays for the Edmonton Oilers. And how would you, as a video game creator, work with the alternate leagues? In this case, the one with the WHA or something like that, or L, that Wayne Gretzky, he started with the Indianapolis Racers, played a handful of games, he got traded to the Edmonton Oilers. He just dominated there. A couple years later, he moves over to the National Hockey League with the Hartford Whalers and Gordie Howe. That All-Star game had Gordie Howe with Wayne Gretzky in it. 1980, I think, the greatest All-Star game for all sports in the history of them, in my opinion, because of that very event. And to me, this would be a very, very fun, entertaining, awesome game to play. And to play over 100 seasons, one of the things I like in games is, I know it wasn't how it was, but short seasons is really good. In baseball, I don't want to play 162 games a season and develop my franchise year over year. So maybe play like 25 game seasons depending on the league sizes. You can increase it to like 28, maybe you play depending on expansions and such. But shorter amount of games, and maybe best of threes in the playoffs. I mean, playoffs, I don't mind playing more games because, I mean, that's when everything's on the line. But that would be really an awesome idea. Now, the cost to be able to get all of the licensing fees, getting all the players, getting all the attributes of them, and the list is, it would be outrageous. But we're in a day and age where electronics and technology is doing so great that everything seems to be improving to such. I think this is just going to come with time. As far as multiplayer games, how fun it would be to be able to pick whatever team. You can pick guys and have like a guy from the 1940s and 50s playing with the 80s. And now in this sense, you'd have to have it so that they would all be able to play together. How would you have Rocket Richard playing against John Tavares, now of the Toronto Maple Leafs, against Wayne Gretzky and Bobby Orr? These are all players that played in different times. So that'd be very interesting. Oh, by the way, I'm actually doing a crypto video, and we're going to talk about Theta. So those who actually didn't skip past and actually watch this, thank you. I know some people probably scrolled over into where the charts are, and I don't blame them. But I just think this is a really cool idea that actually could generate a lot of profit. I'll be going over the one that I'm actually really more excited about, that I think that Vince McMahon does not want me to say. And Vince, the lucky part you have is that hardly anyone's going to watch it. And I don't think anyone on here, there's maybe a small handful of people that would have close to 10 million to invest, but I doubt it. And even if they did, would they do it? All right, then. So we're looking at Theta. Daily term time frame, yada, 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 your own risk, own reward. I got into this before this came on Binance. So this chart says a lot in the daily, even though there's only a few handfuls of days on here. 18 plus a few in here, so about 30 or so. A little over. But we see how it's a correctionary phase in itself. The market was in a downtrend, but it was a correctionary move. And you can't see more, but this thing rallied before going on the exchange. And I've been thinking, maybe one of the better strategies in crypto trading is to keep an eye on Binance and which ones they're going to be adding. And the strategy is, the earliest you can find out, the better, is you see, Binance in 6 days is going to be adding a yada yada altcoin. So now you find it on these smaller exchanges like Cryptopia and even Bittrex for that matter, I would even presume as well. But all the lower volume exchanges, you buy them up there, then you literally doesn't matter if you transfer them to Binance or keep on trading them where they are. For example, if you knew, say, several days before this was going to Binance, the Theta token, then you're on Huobi or another place where Theta is traded, and you're like, oh, it's in like, what date was this? This was June or May 29th. Say you found out like May 25th or May 26th, you knew. I can't remember if one was released, but this thing was much lower then, because when that news was coming up, this thing pumped up pretty well. It was in a very nice uptrend. So then you buy at the lower prices below 2,000 at the time. It opens on Binance. It originally sells off to 2,300. So there's the early people that would maybe playing this type of strategy, and then the market rallies. So you're able to maybe sell as this market rally comes in, because that's very common once it goes to a new exchange, that if it's going to go down from the start, that you're going to get an original pump like this, as was the case. And you just, one of the things is you can transfer coins over to Binance and maybe put some decent sized sell orders. But if you put your sell orders in just Huobi, yeah, I'm going to put one in for 3,200 and whatever, I'm sure it would have hit there. In fact, it had to have hit if it consolidated at 3,400 for several days. So that's one strategy in looking at it. You find them on the smaller exchanges. It's just something I've been thinking about. So then, with this chart, from the up move that occurred, this is a correctionary move. So if I were to look at this on more longer term time frame, I wouldn't be surprised to see 18 average doing something like this, which would be a cool way, actually, if I could. Oh, this is a cool idea. Not like I get many good ideas. Actually, I do. The idea here is, when I'm looking at a chart like this on the daily, and I have to have more data, but I'm supposing that you do, I want to see on this time frame what the 18 average of this period is, and how the, and I think I can do this now, and the 18 average of like the weekly chart or a monthly chart. But I mean, it would be a very tedious thing to do, because you'd have to figure out how many periods it would be to convert, because this would be 18. If you were to do the weekly chart, just quick thinking would tell me 18 times 7, which, the way I like math, if you want to do 18 times 7, math in your head, that is. First, what's 10 times 7? That's 70. What's 8 times 7? That's 56. What do you add? 126. That's how I do math in my head. So therefore, when we have this, I'm thinking of 256 period average of the highs and lows. And then you can see in situations when you have a shorter term going something like this and the longer term going like this, that would pretty much state like a decision day kind of moment, what I call D-Day, where it's got to make the interesting move, probably a decent size in most cases, either to the upside or the downside, in some sort of neutral correctionary mode. As well as big sell-off and rally, because that's when you get to a point where, oh my goodness, we're going to something like, I figured out yesterday the Dow's got one at 24,000 and change where we stand now. So it's at that point long term. So when you get to those situations, either in whichever technical analysis form. Now, normally I don't like to do a bunch of drawing on here when I got lines that are important. Thankfully, it's only one, and it's at 22.95, so I can remember that for many seconds. Oh, that was close. I don't even care if it's exact. I mean, that's close enough. That 22.95 was just it was a little small short-term, intermediate-term Fibonacci downside from this little rally here. And it was a level that maybe is going to have a nice little failed breakdown. Either way, it's having a correctionary test. Either way you look at it. If it can get above this resistance area field, then that's good news. And when we see this on a shorter term, you get a little bit more perspective. Let's look at the good and the bad. And then when you look at it, when you're all said and done, you're like, man, it's neutral. Of course, we were in a spot where we had a very good rally, a very decent sell-off. Okay, then we have this market top that plays through, well, we're making all of these higher lows. That's positive. We're making these lows. We're seeing a lot of symmetricals in these charts. The entire crypto space is symmetrical right now, pretty much. This is crazy. Okay, so we're seeing the decline like that. Then, furthermore, shorter term just around this level here. Each of these is unable to make a higher high, but each time it hasn't really had much of a failed move to the downside. It barely did here, but it pierced below previous low, didn't hold and stay below it, but it did, however, establish the lower end of support. Because in here, when you're looking at it as of yesterday morning, established support was where I drew this line at around 24.30. But then this was one of those situations where it found support there, but it didn't hold. And that's why when I say I want to see a market hold and stay below it, or I think it will, that means if, say, I said an area would be support and has a quick move, a V-shaped formation. For example, let's just assume with the Bitcoin 3000 I talk about over and over again. If it goes down, say at one point where it's like 3,300, 3,400, and man, what a whiplash. It goes down to 2,100 or 1,800. But then an hour and a half later, it's at like 2,600, and 7 hours later, it's at like 33. A week later, it's at 4,000. Well, that was still correct then, of a 3,000 call, because it didn't hold and stay below that 3K level. But what it did do is it did establish it to like a box formation of support. So you readjust in technical analysis to the message of the market, and this move meant that your number of 24.30 got reduced to about 24.10. Resistance has got many layers, so you're playing on the trend line, and even more technical analysis here, good and bad. Why was the market having the very sharp sell-off here in a situation where it's been, there shouldn't be any there shouldn't be extra volatility to sell, because everybody who really wanted to sell near the 25.20 part had many opportunities to do so. So that's a scary situation when the thing can rally up and it gives it back really fast. That line back, but it follows through with a great bullish candle. So that gives you momentum. And when you look at that, you're like, oh, shorter term time frame, it must look pretty good. And it probably does. Look at this. Really fun. You find support there. And then, of course, it looks like it's wanting to leave higher. It might not, but obviously we know that in a move like this, if it fails, and what do we know? How does it fail? It fails when the 18 average gives in and starts to decline. So there's a spot where you're failing. You're not failing here. All right then. So I'm going to finish off the Bitcoin cross and move this over to the Binance coin cross. And on its daily time frame, not many days, but we got enough. We can see. We knew this was in an uptrend too, even though it never was traded against Binance Coin, but its equivalency could always be calculated with the data, which means if you have data to the BNB coin and against Bitcoin and the Theta coin against Bitcoin from previous days, you can do math calculations to get the ratio that way. Throwing that aside, so after this down move, what has the market done? It has now consolidated amongst the 18. It made its move to that point on June 24th. The next day, it had a very positive session, following through by not hanging in there on the highs, but having a move, or excuse me, not hanging in there at the 18 lows, rather, but on the 25th, hanging in there at the highs. That's in itself a bullish situation, but it has to hold it. And it's done so. There has been like 7-8 periods. It's had a move to the 18 of lows, which is priced in at 0092. The low is in at 00924. You can see those numbers. The 18 average of lows is on the left-hand side in blue. And on the top of the screen in green, we can see where the L is. Well, I moved the mouse, but there you can see it at this point. It's not like traders always look at this because, quite frankly, I would think well under 0.1% of traders use the 18 average band like I do. And the vast majority of them are actually because they watch my videos, and that's how low, of course, this is used. So it's established resistance. We know it's in this area. It'd be easier to see the number better by looking at, say, like a 3-hour chart. Oh, easy, yes. And then just the whole cycle point goes down. Every single attempt at the 18 didn't work. Here's your try here. Resistance established. No. I mean, this got and failed fast. This never got above, but it resisted it for a while. And here it got sideways. It had a failed breakout here. Oftentimes from failed moves come fast moves to the downside. And this is the explosion move. This is a spot where it just, when it's ready to go, it went. So it made that statement. So point high to point low. And when you see this, Fibonacci, usually this move is always going to have a decent size fib test. So that's what I'm going to calculate here. So the high is in at 19, I'm just going to look, 1998. Easy to remember if you got years in your head, because I can remember 1998 like it was the year before 1999. And the low at 737, the medieval times, there we go. Was 737 medieval? To me, it's a middle of like basically the Bible times and our times. And I'm so bad at remembering numbers that I really have to find ways of making it easy. So that actually was pretty cool for me because it was easy for me to remember those numbers in a 5 or 6 second time duration. And when I was doing these math calculations example on my head, a lot of times it can be very difficult, that I have to be very focused to do what Stu Unger did very well, was count cards. So basically what I can do, I would need some practice because I haven't done this in a couple years, is if you were to take a deck of cards, deal 51 cards out. If I'm really focused, I should about 60% of the time, 65% of the time tell you what the last card is, and I know if I tell you, I'm going to be right. If you say, do you want to bet what the last card is? If I know I didn't screw up my count, yeah, I do. And I'm going to be right like 100% of the time. So I know a system and how to do that. And it's really easy. It's math. But as far as Fibonacci is concerned here, 1079, 1365. Stu Unger, by the way, the late Stu Unger was one of the greatest poker players ever to play the game, greatest gin rummy players, a mathematician, probably had a photographic memory as well. 1079, 1365. I don't have a photographic memory. So 10, well, obviously this level here was where it found resistance at the 38.2. And the failed breakdown was from that point, and it didn't hold and stay below it. So it's successfully, throughout this duration, been having correctionary move at its first key level. And when it had resistance there for the first time, this was the duration of its correction, which meant that the next key level is 1365, which is like somewhere up here. It had a pierce below it. That is sick. That is sick. And you know what? Maybe one might say when you go with these wild crosses, it's just not going to work. And one example would be, and I could test this out if I had the time and willpower or want to do it. I kind of have I do have the time. I really don't have the want. And that is to take some weird altcoins like LSK or even the like lower ones like XBY, ones that are hardly traded. Any of those low coins, and then cross out some ratios and see what the XBY versus the theta ratio is, and see if Fibonacci works on that, because you can calculate those by taking the difference of two prices, and it really is how much more is one coin worth over the other. So in this case, the value is like, well, the difference is like, well, 0.01 to 1 ratio. The differential of the other one would be a little under 100 when you divide that, because it's just 1x that number. So if the cross was BNB / theta, then the price would be, it should be like 90, like close to 90ish or so. 88? 88, yeah, haha, sweet. Pretty good. Pretty good. 88 and a third. All right, okay. So then, when I see a situation like this, if I miss a sale here, and I'm playing the game, I'll basically revert to good mathematical numbers, good gains, but a decent leg higher from here, you'd have to expect a decent pierce above. I would think close to the 15 number if it's going to have a decent leg higher from this point. Okay, well that's it. There's your idea for video games, sports genres, professional sports. How fun it would be to see all these players on different teams you never would have thought before. And now I'll end this, and don't know if I'll do another video or not. I'm not planning on such, but if I see something cool in the market, or I have an idea that I actually want to share right now, of course the pro wrestling one will come in at least a week. Take care. Bye-bye.